So if you guys haven't heard the news yet, last night Shams Charania, he reported that James Harden and the Los Angeles Clippers are working together to try to find him a new team before the trade deadline on Thursday. And it really got me thinking, what is James Harden's legacy going to be like 10, 15 years from now when he's long retired and we're talking about him in a historical context? How are we going to remember this dude? Because he's had a truly perplexing career, and these trade requests are crazy. This is the fourth team he's done it to. And this might be the worst case scenario, or the worst timing out of all of them, which is saying something, because if you go through his history, it's kind of crazy. But as far as the Clippers themselves go, they're on fire right now. They're something like 17-3 in their last 20. They've crawled their way back into playoff contention. Kawhi Leonard is playing the best ball he has ever played in a Clippers uniform. And James Harden wants out. And it's reported that the reason he wants out is because they won't give him a fully guaranteed contract extension, which makes sense at his age with his mileage. And especially coming off that Game 7 last year, why would they give him a max contract? That's an insane expectation for him. And it kind of makes him look bad, because it shows that he is more concerned with getting paid than he is with actually winning. Because like I said, the Clippers are on fire right now. So when you go through James Harden's whole career, it's one of the most unique careers in basketball history. Historically, statistically, he's one of the best regular season guards of all time. But he also is one of the worst postseason performers of all time, which makes a very interesting dynamic there when you're talking about him historically. You start out with his OKC years, and granted, if he would have stayed with OKC, I think everybody knows if he would have stayed there, they would have got at least one title, if not many more, with him, Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, all in their early to mid-20s. Titles were on the horizon for them. It's not necessarily his fault that he got traded from there. There's reports they didn't want to give him a max contract. They were ducking the luxury tax. But at the same time, the reports always were that he did want his own team. And obviously, it was good for him to go get his own team because, like I said, statistically, one of the greatest regular season guards we have ever seen. And if he stays in OKC, he does not reach that. If he stays in OKC, in my opinion, he surpasses Manu Ginobili as the greatest sixth man of all time. I think he would have continued to play that role, be that third guy, just like Ginobili. Ginobili was the third best player on those Spurs teams. Some years he was the second best player, but he still always came off the bench for the most part. Would have been the same thing with James Harden. It's not about who starts the game, it's about who closes the game. So he'd have racked up a million Sixth Man of the Year awards. Like I said, he would have went down as the greatest sixth man in NBA history. But he gets traded, he goes to Houston, and Houston, he puts up some of the craziest stats that we've ever seen. Now you can make whatever excuses to try to knock his accomplishments down a peg. You know, you can point to the all-time usage rate that he had, the way the game was played, the particular style that Mike D'Antoni played with him, the very heliocentric style where he had the ball 90% of the time. You know, you can use whatever excuses you want for why he put up those statistics, but the fact remains, he put up those statistics, and he was an Iron Man in those Houston days. He rarely missed games. He was always above 70-plus games played with the Rockets. The problem is he always came up short in the postseason. Now, he was going against the Warriors, the unbeatable Warriors with Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, all that. For sure, he was losing to better teams, but when you go back and look at his performances in those closeout games, he just always came up short. So, and then the way that he left Houston too, I was doing a little bit of research this morning to try to remember, because honestly, ever since COVID, it's like the last 6 years have all just kind of muddied together, and it's hard to remember exactly what happened. But if you guys remember, before COVID, that little 2-month span from like January, February, up until they shut the season down, the Rockets were really coming into their own, and they had finally figured out how to play Russell Westbrook with James Harden. They were having Westbrook be an off-ball cutter, a screener. He was putting up like 27 a game. I think it was like 11 rebounds and 8 assists in the month of January before they shut the season down. So they were figuring it out. And then the bubble comes. James Harden comes back from the bubble. He's not even close to in shape. They get eliminated by the Lakers. And then he decides he doesn't want to play with Russell Westbrook anymore. He demands that they trade Russell Westbrook. They trade him for John Wall. John Wall, love the dude to death. He's one of the biggest what-if stories in NBA history. But at that point in his career, he wasn't John Wall anymore. So it was a stupid, short-sighted trade for James Harden to demand them to do. And then he also wanted them to sign his buddy Boogie Cousins. Boogie Cousins, once again, one of the all-time what-if cases in NBA history, was just not an NBA basketball player at that point in his career anymore. The injuries had taken hold. So he plays, like 10 games with them, and then he decides he wants out. He's like, get me the fuck out of here. He'd been talking to Kevin Durant since KD had got to Brooklyn, basically, and there had always been those rumblings, but he really demanded that trade. And then he bailed on them, man. He wasn't showing up to practice. He was sitting out the games. When he did show up to the games, he looked fat as shit. He let himself get out of shape. It was honestly one of the most embarrassing things a superstar has ever done. But he got his way. He goes to Brooklyn. Brooklyn, another all-time what-if case. I truly believe if James Harden had stayed healthy, if Kyrie Irving had stayed healthy, they would have won a title. Kevin Durant was mostly healthy for their run. He had a couple bumps and bruises here and there, but mainly in those playoffs. The one playoff where Kyrie landed on, Giannis's foot, was basically out for the playoffs. James Harden, his hamstring was a mess, was basically out for the playoffs. And the reason his hamstring was a mess was because he let himself get fat as shit in Houston, and then he ramped himself up too quick to try to get back into shape in Brooklyn. If none of that happens, if they're both just in shape and don't get injured, Brooklyn wins the title that year. I think it's fair to say that. But goes to Brooklyn, and then he starts having problems with Kyrie. And I know Kyrie's kind of tough to deal with sometimes, but I don't blame it on Kyrie. I think hindsight now, we all can agree it was kind of bullshit that they weren't letting him play home games that year. All these years removed from COVID, I think we can admit that. But he runs into battles with Kyrie. Once again, he demands a trade. And once again, he gets fat as shit. He lets himself, he tanks his value to a point where they just have to send him out for Ben Simmons. And once again, it was an embarrassing thing for an all-time great player to do. I don't care what excuses you're going to make for him. It's just flat out embarrassing to do that. So he goes to Philly. He's got, he had a little run there with Embiid. In Philly, he couldn't stay healthy. Embiid couldn't stay healthy. It's I'm a boxing fan. So I kind of compare it to Roy Jones Jr., where he moved up in weight and he put on a lot of weight. Granted, when Roy Jones did it, it was a lot of muscle. When James Harden did it, it was all fat. But he moved up in weight, and then when he tried getting back down to his weight, he had lost a little bit of his athleticism. He'd lost a little bit of his mobility. He was never the same fighter again. And I love Roy Jones Jr., but we can all agree once he came back down to try to fight at the lighter weight classes, he just lost something. Your body can only handle so much weight gain and weight loss before it takes its toll. Same thing happened with James Harden. By the second time he'd let himself get fat as hell in Brooklyn and then tried playing himself back into shape, the injuries just started mounting up. Now, granted, he did play through most of them. I have to give Harden credit. He hasn't traditionally been like a hard load management guy. He's kind of been an Iron Man for most of his career, but the injuries definitely affected him, and you really saw that in Philly. You did not get the best version of James Harden. In Philly, his shooting numbers were at an all-time low. His turnover numbers were at an all-time high. So basically in Philly, same thing happens. They have a couple postseason runs. He comes up short in, Game 7 against the Celtics was all-time embarrassing moment for him. If I remember that series correctly, he had a really good game 1 and 2, and everybody was like, holy shit, can we eliminate the playoff James Harden stuff now? And then in the elimination games, he showed us who he is when his back is against the wall like that. So he flames out of Philly because, similar to this Clippers situation, they don't want to give him a max contract. I mean, at that time, he was 34 years old. He'd been out of shape. Like, all these problems with him, justifiably so, they did not want to pay him. You can't blame them for that at all. Even if Daryl Morey maybe made him a handshake agreement before he signed there, still can't blame Philly because you did not live up to your promise as a player. So he forces his way out of there, goes on a whole press tour, just dogging Daryl Morey in the press. I'm not going to give him too much shit about that, but then he goes to LA. And in LA last year, I thought he revitalized himself. I thought last year he looked kind of like peak Harden again. I was saying he should have made All-NBA third team last year. He was really good. He was the Clippers' best player last year, and I honestly thought they were going to win that Nuggets series. And he had a couple good games at the beginning of that series, and then Game 7 is one of the most embarrassing playoff performances you will ever see from a Hall of Fame player in NBA history, and they got eliminated. So now here we are, 6 months later, he's demanding a trade. They're saying the Cavaliers are interested. As a diehard Donovan Mitchell fan, I really hope the Cavaliers don't do that. Him and Donovan Mitchell make absolutely no sense. And if you get outside of that, it really doesn't make sense to try to figure out a team that's going to trade for him. It's hard to come up with one. People are going to say the Timberwolves because they need another ball handler. I don't know how James Harden and Anthony Edwards fit together. There will be other teams. I mean, Milwaukee could make a desperation play to try to keep Giannis happy. I don't think Giannis really likes James Harden. They've had a little bit of back and forth in the past. So it's perplexing, man. It's really, when you break down James Harden and his career and all the different ways he's come up short and all the different times he's just been flat out embarrassing, it's interesting when you try to put him in a historical context. For my money, greatest shooting guards of all time, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Jerry West, Dwayne Wade. Then you can start talking to me about James Harden, but I'm probably going to take Clyde Drexler.